Hey guys! Just before Halloween, I released a zombie hunter video collaboration with Fables in Fashion, Violet LeBeau and Jimmy America. If you like dark action films or you're just dead into zombies, you can check it out right here. Now, I've had a number of requests from you guys to show you how I've created some of the visual effects used in the short film. Therefore, today we will look at the first one of those visual effects, the zombie speedrun. If you haven't checked out the video, which I highly recommend you do, or maybe you've just got a really terrible short-term memory, this is what the final effect looks like. I'm not going to worry about the muzzle flash for this video. I already have a more in-depth tutorial on muzzle flashes if you do want to check that out. But now let's jump into After Effects and have a look at the individual pieces that make up the zombie speedrun effect. This effect contains multiple elements. There's an obvious speed up of Selena's movement, but I also added an increased motion blur as well as a shadow trail and some particles to give the whole effect a more supernatural feel and disguise the fact that in essence it's just a simple time remap. I often find myself in situations where the base effect looks rather plain. In those cases I tend to add additional dynamic elements like particles or additional adjustment layers into the composition to make the effect as a whole look more convincing. If you give your viewer a lot of visual detail to take in, they may not notice a lot of the small imperfections in the bits and pieces that make up that effect. However, don't take that as an excuse to slack off. You should still try to make every piece of your effect as convincing and as good looking as you can. Here's the original footage we shot. I placed my DSLR on a tripod, which I suggest you use for almost all shots where you want to add visual effects to in the end. Selena gets up, runs towards me from side to side, while I move very slowly, trying to match her movement with the aim of my gun. In retrospect, we should have just filmed the scene twice. One time just with Selena and one time just with me in the shot, because speeding up my movement to match Selena's speedrun ended up being a little bit jerky if you look closely. However, you make the best of what you have, remember the lesson for next time and move on. For this tutorial I will focus on creating the speedrun effect, so here's the cleaned layer with only Selena in the shot. Yes, I know, due to the masking, you can see the shadows being cut off a little bit on the left side, but in the final effect my body covers those imperfections anyways. However, as I said, it would have been better to think in layers and film the pieces individually. The first thing to do is to time remap your footage. Time remapping allows you to speed up or slow down parts of your footage at will, and you can enable it by going to Layer, Time, Enable Time Remapping. I want Selena's movement to be rather twitchy and strange, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create keyframes just before and just after she turns around, and then I'm going to compress the space between those two keyframes. When you compress the space between the two keyframes, also move the keyframe at the very end of the clip. Otherwise, the end of your clip will get stretched in time. Now I'll repeat this process to speed up Selena's running. I leave small pauses every time Selena stops just to make the running look even more aggressive by contrast. Playing the animation, you can really see the effect of the time remapping. The next thing I want to do is I want to add additional motion blur into the shot to make the movement look even faster. Search for the CC Force Motion Blur effect and add it to your clip. Increase the shutter angle to 300 degrees to add additional motion blur into your shot. Now Selena looks like she's moving at superhuman speed. To create the shadow trail effect, you will need one image of your scene without anyone in it. I took a photo here with the DSLR on the tripod without Selena or me in the scene. As you can see, it is simply a photo of an empty scene. Since we're just going to use it as an input to the difference matte effect, you can actually disable the visibility on it. Next, duplicate your footage and give it a useful name like shadow trail. Then apply a difference matte effect to the shadow trail layer. For the difference layer of the difference matte effect, select your clean plate. Then set your view to be matte only. This will give you a black and white representation of the difference in pixels between your shadow trail and your clean plate layer. Let's adjust the matching tolerance as well as the matching softness to create a really nice, smooth, shadowy effect. Yeah, 13 and 31 seems to be working quite well. Next, apply an invert effect to the shadow trailer to invert the colors. If you now play back the footage, you will see a dark shadow moving where Selena is. Due to the way the difference matte works, there are quite a few artifacts in the shadow trail layer. You can clean all of those out with masks, but for now it's not really that important, let's just move on with the effect. Set the blend mode of your shadow trail layer to multiply. Jump to a time position where Selena is running and drag the shadow trail layer a little bit towards the right. This will delay the shadow and make it seem like it's following Selena very closely. Because I only want to show the shadow trail while Selena is running, I'm going to animate the opacity to fade in every time Selena runs and then fade out whenever she pauses. Now duplicate the shadow trail layer twice and delay each of those new layers by one additional frame. Selena will end up with 3 copies of the shadow trail following her closely, and if you play back the footage, this will give a really nice ghostly speed effect. Now, this looks pretty good already, but one thing I like to do to almost all my effects is to add a few particles just to make the final effect look a little bit fuller. I'm a big fan of Red Giant's particular plugin just for a lot of the advanced particle controls you can get with it, and it is actually what I used in the Zombie Hunter short film. However, for this tutorial I will use the inbuilt particle world system just to show you how you can create the same effect without any plugins. To create the particles, first create a new solid layer, give it a useful name, and then assign the CC Particle World effect to it. In the Particle World effect, under Grid and Guides, you can disable the grid and the horizon as we don't really need to see those helpers. Under the producer settings, we want to set the size of the producer to a long vertical line that about matches Selena's body. For this, I'm going to set my X and Z radius to 0, and then I'm going to adjust my Y radius to match Selena's height. 0.05 looks about right. Next, go into the particle setting. Set your particle type to be a faded sphere. Next, set the birth and the death color of your particles to black. This will give us nice, dark looking particles. Next, we want to match the size of the particles to our scene. For this, I'm going to reduce the birth size to about 0.15 and I'm going to set my death size to 0 because I want my particles to shrink as they die. I'm also going to slightly increase the size variation just so that all the particles aren't exactly the same size and it looks a little bit more organic. Now for the important part, the physics. Open your physics submenu. We want the particles to appear to be generated by Selena's movement and then slowly drift upwards as they die. For this, set the velocity to 0 as we don't want our particles to be flying every which way when they're being spawned. We're going to be animating the producer to follow Selena's movement as she runs left and right through the scene. We want the particles to inherit a little bit of the momentum of Selena running. For this, I'm going to set inherit velocity to 10%. This means that 10% of the speed of the animated producer will get transferred over to the particles as they spawn, and they will get flung a little bit in the direction that Selena is running. Next, I want the particles to drift up slowly after they've been born. For this, I'm going to set my gravity to something small but negative like minus 0.1. Next, we want to animate the producer to follow Selena's movement. For this, enable keyframing on the X, Y and Z position of the producer. We also want to animate the birth rate because we only want particles to be emitted while Selena is running, so I'm also going to enable the keyframing on the birth rate. Now keyframe the position and the birth rate of your producer. The producer should follow Selena's movement from left to right through the scene, and the birth rate should start at 0, go up every time Selena is running and then decrease back to 0 the moment she stops. This will spawn particles along the path that Selena is running, and it will only generate particles while she is running. This creates a nice dark particle trail that overlays nicely with the shadow trail we already have. And once you've done that, your effect is complete. And that is how you create the zombie speedrun effect from our Zombie Hunter visual effects short film. I do hope you enjoyed this more behind the effects style tutorial, and do let me know what other effects you would like to see. I always appreciate any serious feedback and do my very best to reply to every single one of them. So as always, please leave any comments, questions or suggestions in the section below. Please subscribe if you want to see more, or come and stalk me on Facebook or Twitter. Until next time, I will see you later.